He was the kind of man who had everything: power, wealth, influence, a name whispered on Wall Street with both reverence and fear. But the night Ethan Grayson took his new girlfriend to Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, he wasn't expecting his carefully controlled world to crack open. Because across the room, dressed in a waitress uniform, stood the one woman he'd spent months trying to forget, his ex-wife, pregnant. That single moment, one glance, one heartbeat, was enough to unravel years of silence, secrets, and a love he thought he'd buried for good. But Clara wasn't the same woman he'd left behind. And the baby she carried, it might just be his. What happens when a man used to controlling everything realizes the one thing he truly needed was the one he let go? Stay until the end. This isn't a love story. It's a reckoning. And now let me begin that story. Ethan Grayson stepped out of his black town car with the elegance of a man who never questioned his place in the world. Manhattan buzzed with its usual urgency, but for him, time seemed to slow down as he approached the glowing entrance of La Lumière, the French restaurant known only to those who moved in the highest circles. The doorman recognized him instantly, offering a respectful nod. Ethan returned it with a glance, polished and calculated, before extending his arm to the woman beside him. Vanessa Carter, in her signature crimson gown, was the very picture of high fashion and high maintenance. The dress clung to her like a secret, its slit daring and deliberate. As she took Ethan's arm and swept inside, the pair exuded the effortless glamour of a couple too used to admiration to be moved by it. Inside, the restaurant shimmered. Crystal chandeliers dangled from vaulted ceilings, casting golden halos across tables dressed in white linen and soft candlelight. The scent of aged wine and delicate truffle cream filled the air, a perfume of wealth and indulgence. It was a place designed to impress, and Ethan, like everything in his life, had chosen it with intention. Vanessa leaned closer, her voice a breath against his ear. "It's perfect," she purred, her long fingers trailing possessively along his wrist, brushing his watch, a limited edition Rolex that gleamed beneath the chandelier light. Ethan smiled, but the gesture was practiced. Everything about this dinner was orchestrated. Vanessa, the restaurant, the timing. Public image mattered, especially to a man whose name was synonymous with power and perfection. This wasn't about romance, it never was. It was branding, optics, and control. They were seated at a central table visible, but not center stage. The ideal blend of privacy and presence. Vanessa immediately launched into talk of their upcoming appearance at a charity gala, her voice animated with the importance of being seen, photographed, and remembered. Ethan nodded on cue, his mind disengaged, eyes scanning the room with the casual boredom of someone who'd dined in 100 such places, until he saw a waitress passed by swiftly, balancing a tray of wine glasses with the kind of grace only long hours in heels and silence could teach. Ethan's gaze locked on her face and froze. Clara, his ex-wife. For a moment, the air around him seemed to crystallize, the din of conversation, the clinking of glasses, all of it dulled into a muted hum. There was no mistaking her. The same gentle features, the dark eyes that once searched his face for the smallest sign of tenderness. She was thinner and more tired-looking, but her movements carried a quiet strength. And then he noticed it, the swell beneath her apron, her belly, round, prominent, unmistakable. Clara was pregnant. A sharp twist coiled in his stomach. His hand, which had been resting on the back of Vanessa's chair, fell away without him realizing. His breath caught, then steadied again, externally at least. Ethan had spent a lifetime learning how to mask chaos behind a cool facade. Vanessa didn't notice the shift. She was still talking, still playing her role in the performance. He nodded at something she said, not hearing a word, his attention captured by the sight of Clara as she disappeared into the kitchen. He tried to ground himself. This was a coincidence, a mistake. Maybe she was working temporarily. Maybe she had moved on and started a new life. But pregnant? Vanessa's voice cut through again, this time laced with irritation. "Ethan, are you even listening?" He turned to her, blinking. "Sorry, what did you say?" "The Vogue photographer wants to do a couple spread with us. I think it's brilliant. A modern power couple. Wall Street and fashion. Don't you think? He nodded automatically, his expression carefully arranged, but her words evaporated before they fully landed. Across the restaurant, the kitchen door swung open again, and Clara reemerged. Her gaze was down, focused on a bottle of Bordeaux she carried to another table, but Ethan saw it the moment her eyes flicked up and saw him. She froze. It was subtle, no more than a stutter in her step, but to him, it was seismic. A current passed between them, electric and immediate. For a split second, time rewound to their last day together. The echo of her signature on their divorce papers, the sound of the door closing behind her, and the silence that followed. Then she straightened, professional, composed. She turned away without a word. Ethan pushed back his chair. "Where you going?" Vanessa asked, not looking up from her phone as she adjusted the lighting for a selfie. "Restroom," he murmured. He didn't wait for her response. Clara was moving toward the far side of the restaurant. He intercepted her between tables, stepping into her path without hesitation. He stopped. The tray trembled in her hands but didn't fall. "Clara," he said quietly. There was tension in his voice, like a string stretched too tight. She looked up at him, expression unreadable. "Mr. Grayson," she said, formal and cool. Her voice had changed, less soft, more grounded. "Don't do that," he said, glancing toward her belly, his voice lower now. Is that what I think it is?" Her jaw tightened. "I don't know what you think, Ethan." He stepped closer. "Don't play games. You're pregnant." "Why am I just now finding out?" Clary's eyes held his, calm but unwavering. "Because it has nothing to do with you." His hands clenched at his sides. "You don't get to decide that. If this baby is mine—" "This isn't the place for this conversation," she interrupted, her voice quieter but firmer. "I'm working—" Before he could say another word, she turned and disappeared into the kitchen. Ethan stood there, motionless, for a long second. He returned to the table, but everything had changed. Vanessa was still scrolling through her phone, absorbed in her reflection, but Ethan's mind was far from the restaurant, from Vanessa, from the carefully curated life he had built. Clara was pregnant, and he had no idea who the father was. But deep in his gut, where instinct beat logic every time, Ethan already knew the truth, and it shook him in a way nothing in his life ever had. The skyline of Manhattan glittered like a promise, but Ethan Grayson stood behind the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, unmoved. The view had once thrilled him. It had represented everything he'd fought for: power, success, the empire he'd built from nothing. But tonight it felt distant, dull. In his hand was a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling like the thoughts spinning relentlessly in his mind. He hadn't touched it, not really. He just needed something to hold on to. The image of Clara, pregnant, working in a restaurant, her eyes startled and proud, wouldn't leave him. It haunted him with more force than he expected, not because he had feelings for her, at least that's what he told himself, but because it shattered the illusion he had so carefully constructed. The past was neatly packed away, labeled, done, and shoved into the back of the closet. Except it wasn't done. It never had been. She had vanished from his life 5 months ago. One moment she was in his home, his wife, quiet, efficient, someone he barely noticed most days. The next, she was gone. No fight, no accusations. Just a single envelope on the marble countertop and silence where her presence used to be. At the time, he'd welcomed it. Freedom, simplicity. He had told himself that Clara had always wanted too much time, too much emotion, too much of him. But now he wasn't so sure. He sat down at his desk, the weight of the silence pressing in around him. He reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over her name in the contacts. It was still there. Clara Bennett. He had never deleted it, though he'd told himself he would. Eventually, he tapped call. The line rang, each tone carving deeper into the anxiety crawling up his spine. Then, voicemail. Her voice was calm, clipped, distant. Not the Clara he remembered, not exactly. He didn't leave a message. Then Grayson didn't beg. But something inside him cracked in the quiet that followed. Across the city, in a modest apartment in Queens, Clara Bennett lay curled on the worn couch, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. The baby shifted within her, a small flutter of life that made her smile despite everything. She placed a hand over her belly, breathing slowly, trying to still her racing mind. Seeing Ethan tonight had been like stepping into a memory she'd tried hard to forget. For a moment, he looked the same, immaculate in his designer suit, posture confident, eyes sharp. But there had been something else, too, vulnerability, confusion, as if the world had tilted in his hands for the first time. She hadn't wanted him to see her like that, not swollen and tired in a server's uniform, not fragile, but she had held her head high, the way she always did. She had learned that grace was not in how you looked, but in how you held yourself when your heart was breaking. Memories came rushing in, so many moments, once insignificant, now heavy with meaning. Their quiet dinners at home, where silence grew louder than words. Her birthday, when he forgot, until late in the evening and covered it with an expensive necklace and an apology that didn't touch his eyes. And then that night, the night everything cracked. They had been sitting at the kitchen table, both trying to pretend they were still a couple. Clara had asked about children, softly, almost in passing. Ethan, she had said, have you ever thought about us having a baby? His fork had hovered in the air, his eyes narrowing, not in cruelty, but in calculation. Clara, you know how destructive that would be for us right now. You know how much Grayson Capital demands from me. He hadn't meant he hurt her, but that was the problem, wasn't it? He hadn't even thought about hurting her. From that moment on, she stopped bringing it up. She stopped bringing anything up. The marriage didn't explode, it simply dissolved. So when she found out she was pregnant, after months of fertility consultations she had kept private, clinging to the smallest chance, she knew she couldn't stay, and Ethan would see the baby as a liability, a burden. And Clara wanted this child to be wanted, unconditionally. Leaving had been the hardest decision of her life, but she had done it for the baby and for herself. Her phone buzzed beside her, a missed call. Ethan. She let it ring. She couldn't do this now. Her hand rested protectively over her belly, and for the first time that night she allowed herself to cry. Back in his penthouse, Ethan poured the whiskey down the sink. The burn of it wasn't enough to dull the ache inside him. He opened his laptop, his fingers moving with purpose now. He searched for Clara. It didn't take long. Her current address, the restaurants where she worked, even her work schedule. But what stopped him was the divorce file. He scrolled through it line by line, trying to make sense of something he had signed without thought. Clara had taken nothing. No financial support, no alimony, no part of the empire they had built together, not even the apartment they once shared. At the time, he had told himself she wanted to move on quickly, that she wasn't interested in the mess of negotiations, that it was her way of being dignified. But now it felt like something else. Pain, disappointment, finality. He remembered her voice the day she left, barely above a whisper. I just want to move on, Ethan. And he'd let her, without asking why, without fighting. A man like him had conquered markets, industries, and even governments, but when it came to the one person who had once sat across from him every night, he hadn't fought at all. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. The city stretched before him, brilliant and indifferent. But his world no longer felt like his own. The restaurant was winding down. The usual clatter of plates had softened into quiet conversations and clinking wine glasses. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious. Inside, the air grew heavier. Ethan Grayson sat at a dimly lit corner table, far from the center where powerful men like to be seen. Tonight, he didn't want to be seen. Tonight wasn't about power, it was about answers. He had waited. Long after dessert had been cleared and the last of the guests had gone, he remained unmoving, his eyes locked on the kitchen doors. The restaurant staff were beginning to tidy up. The lights were a little brighter now, more practical than romantic. But still, she hadn't come out. And then she did. Clara stepped through the door with a cloth in one hand and fatigue in every movement. Her uniform was creased from hours on her feet, and her belly, now more visible than ever, shifted slightly as she walked. She hadn't seen him yet, but he saw her, and he stood. Clara froze when she spotted him. Their eyes met, his intense, unblinking, hers guarded. She approached slowly, her steps hesitant but composed, like someone walking into a courtroom rather than a conversation. "Can we talk?" Ethan asked. "I'm working," she replied, her tone clipped but not cold. "I'll wait," he said. His voice was calm, determined. Clara stared at him for a moment too long, then turned away. She didn't say yes, but she didn't tell him to leave either. But that was enough. Nearly an hour passed. Ethan stayed right where he was, unmoved. When the restaurant finally closed, Clara appeared outside. She wrapped her coat around herself and walked toward the curb, expecting him to follow. He did. The night air was sharp, tinged with late winter frost. They stood beneath a flickering street lamp, the light casting long shadows on the pavement between them. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "You know what I want," he said. "No," she replied, "I only know what you think you want." His jaw tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "About the baby." Clara looked away, her breath forming a pale cloud in the cold. "Because you never wanted children," I remembered, "every time you told me that." "That wasn't your decision to make alone?" Her eyes met his again, fierce and steady. "Wasn't it? Would you have stayed, Ethan? Out of guilt? Out of obligation? Or worse, would you have insisted I end the pregnancy?" His silence was answer enough. "I made the decision," she continued, her voice quieter now, "not to punish you, but because I wanted this child to be born in a world where they were wanted, where they wouldn't grow up being resented. I wouldn't have." "You don't know that," she cut in, "because you never asked me what I wanted. You never even asked if I was happy." Ethan looked at her, then really looked at the weariness in her posture, the pain just beneath her strength. She wasn't trying to win the argument. She was just trying to be heard. "I appreciate I deserve to know," he said, his voice low. Clara nodded slowly. "You deserve many things, Ethan, but this child, he deserves even more." He blinked. She nodded again, her hand unconsciously resting over her belly. "Yes, the boy." Something inside him buckled. A son. The word felt foreign on his tongue, something soft, fragile, and utterly powerful. Clara turned to go. Ethan took a step forward. "Clara, wait." "No," she said gently, firmly. This isn't just about biology, Ethan. Being a father isn't something you declare in the middle of the night after a business meeting. It's something you are. And I don't think you know what that means yet." He walked toward her building, her silhouette shrinking in the night. He stood on the sidewalk, rooted in place, the chill of the wind biting at his collar. But inside him, something else was stirring. Not rage, not control, not even certainty. It was about, and the uncomfortable possibility that, for the first time in his life, he didn't have the answer. Ethan Grayson was not a man who tolerated uncertainty. In business and in life, he made swift, calculated decisions. Control was the cornerstone of his success. But in the days following his late-night confrontation with Clara, control felt like a distant memory. He couldn't focus. Meetings blurred together, numbers lost their sharpness, and even the sharpest investment pitch felt trivial. Instead, his mind looped back to that quiet sidewalk and Clara's unwavering voice. "This isn't just about biology," she had said, and she was right. But that didn't stop the need burning inside him to understand why she had shut him out so completely. He hired a private investigator. It wasn't a decision he was proud of, but pride wasn't the point anymore. Answers were. Ethan wanted to know everything Clara hadn't said, what she had endured, why she had drawn such a harsh boundary between them. The report came in 3 days later, thin but telling. Clara was still living in Queens in a modest walk-up apartment. She worked nearly full-time at the restaurant to cover expenses. She had refused several high-paying job offers over the past months, jobs that, upon further inspection, were connected to companies in Ethan's network. She had walked away from opportunities just to stay outside of his orbit. That alone rattled him. But What truly shook him came at the end of the report. Clara had visited a fertility specialist almost a year before their divorce, quietly, without telling him. She had been trying to get pregnant while they were still together. Ethan sat in his office, staring at the document. The evidence was there in black and white, clinical and indisputable. She had wanted a child, not later, not someday, during their marriage. And he had been too consumed by deadlines and deals to even notice. A knot of regret twisted in his chest. He thought back to those long, quiet evenings when Clara would sit across from him with a question in her eyes that never made it to her lips. How many times had he missed the signs? How many things had she swallowed for the sake of preserving what little connection they had left? He had never asked, and now he couldn't stop asking. That night, Ethan returned to the restaurant. Again, he chose a table in the back where he could observe without being too obvious. He told himself he wasn't there to intimidate or pressure, but part of him needed to see her, to convince himself this was real, that Clara, his Clara, was building a new life that no longer had room for him. As she moved between tables, efficient and graceful despite her growing belly, Ethan noticed something else. A man, mid-30s, clean-cut, with a quiet presence, occasionally glanced toward Clara with subtle concern. He wasn't a customer. He wore an apron, too. A manager, maybe. Their eyes met briefly, and the man narrowed his gaze. Later, when Clara came to Ethan's table, her expression tightened. "You can't keep showing up here. I need to talk to you," he said, keeping his voice low. "I know about the fertility clinic." Her eyes widened just slightly. "You had someone investigate me?" "I needed to understand," Ethan replied. "You were trying for a baby while we were still married. Why didn't you tell me?" Clara let out a slow breath. "Because you'd already made it clear what you wanted, Ethan. And it wasn't a child. You should have told me anyway. And risk what?" Her voice hardened. "You reject the idea outright, blaming me for wanting something real, something permanent?" Before he could respond, the manager approached, calm, composed, but there was no mistaking the protective energy in his stance. "Is everything okay here?" Claire turned to him. "It's fine, Lucas. We're just finishing up." Lucas didn't look convinced, but he nodded and walked away, his posture still rigid. Ethan watched him leave, the tension in his jaw growing. Clara hesitated, clearly choosing her words. "He's my manager." "Looks like more than that," Ethan muttered, bitterness leaking through. "Is he the father?" Her eyes snapped to his. "No. But even if he was, that wouldn't concern you, unless you're ready to be involved for the right reasons." He stood abruptly, his frustration mounting. "You think I'm here out of ego? That I just want control?" "I know you," Clara said firmly. You don't ask questions to understand. You ask to win. And this child is not something you can win or control." Lucas was watching from across the room now. Clara caught sight of him and stepped slightly between the two men. "Ethan, I'm asking you to leave. Don't make a scene." For a moment, Ethan looked like he might argue, but then something in Clara's eyes, the weariness, the resolve, made him stop. He turned without another word and left the restaurant, the door closing with a soft finality behind him. Clara exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against her belly. Lucas came over moments later, his voice gentle. "You okay?" She nodded, though the answer wasn't simple. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Lucas didn't press, but he lingered near a silent shield. What Clara didn't say was that Ethan's presence stirred up things she had buried long ago. Guilt, longing, confusion. Part of her had wanted him to fight for her. But now that he was, she didn't know if she could believe him. Not yet. And Ethan, as he stepped into the night, couldn't shake the image of Lucas standing beside her like a guardian, a man who clearly knew her in ways Ethan never had. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't just threatened by a rival. He was threatened by the realization that he might be too late. The wind howled through the narrow alleys of Queens as Clara stepped off the subway platform, one hand resting protectively over her belly. The chill bit through her coat, but the real discomfort came from deep within, an ache a pressure that had started earlier in the evening and now refused to go away. She told herself it was nothing. Braxton Hicks, maybe. Just another long shift taking its toll. But even as she walked, slower than usual, there was a sinking feeling she couldn't quite shake. By the time she reached her apartment building, her steps were heavy, her breath shallow. Her keys slipped in the lock once, then again before she finally made it inside. The familiar scent of lavender and old wood wrapped around her, usually a comfort, but tonight it only emphasized how alone she felt. Clara eased herself down onto the couch, breathing through another tightening wave across her abdomen. It passed after a minute, but left her shaken. She closed her eyes, whispering to the baby inside her, "Not yet, just hold on a little longer." She still had almost 8 weeks to go. Across Manhattan, Ethan sat in a sleek conference room surrounded by executives. The skyline behind him gleamed like a promise, but his mind was anywhere but there. His phone vibrated in his jacket. He almost ignored it until he saw the number. Unfamiliar. But something in his chest stirred. "Excuse me," he said, abruptly standing before anyone had finished their sentence. He stepped out and answered the call. "Mr. Grayson," a woman's voice. Urgent, unsure. "This is Jenna. I live next door to Clara. She's not well. I tried to get her to call an ambulance, but she kept saying she was fine. She's not. I didn't know who else to call." And he didn't hesitate. "Text me the address." Within minutes, he was in the back of his town car, urging the driver to speed. The lights of the city blurred past as anxiety twisted inside him like wire. Clara was in trouble, and she hadn't called him. That fact alone made his chest tighten. But someone had. That was all that mattered now. When he arrived, Jenna met him at the door, her face drawn with concern. "She's on the couch, barely able to move. She said she just needed rest," but he was already inside. Clara looked up as he entered, her face pale, her body curled around the pain. "Ethan, what are you—" "You don't have a choice," he said, kneeling beside her. His voice was firm, but his hand was gentle, brushing her hair from her damp forehead. "We're going to the hospital." "I'm fine," she whispered, but another wave of pain contorted her features, silencing her denial. Without waiting for more resistance, he scooped her into his arms. Lucas had just arrived from the hallway, having gotten Jenna's message. He froze when he saw Ethan holding her. "What's going on?" "She needs a hospital," Ethan said, already moving past him. "Now." Lucas nodded, stepping aside. There was no time to argue. Not now. The ride to the hospital was quiet, save for Clara's sharp, uneven breaths and the occasional whisper of reassurance from Ethan. He held her hand, strong and steady, anchoring her while, inside, he was falling apart. This was too soon. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. In the ER, the nurses moved fast. Clara was wheeled away for evaluation, while Ethan remained in the waiting room, pacing like a man with no plan for once. Minutes felt like hours. Every door that opened made his heart lurch. Finally, a nurse appeared. "She's stable, but the baby's coming. It's premature, but we're doing everything we can." Ethan was allowed into the delivery room. Clara looked small in the hospital bed, her hair damp with sweat, her body trembling from exhaustion and fear. But when she saw him enter, something in her eyes softened. "You didn't have to come," she whispered. He stepped closer, taking her hand. "Yes, I did." The hours that followed blurred into a haze of motion and sound. Doctors calling instructions, nurses adjusting machines, and the rhythmic beep of a monitor like a ticking clock. Through it all, Ethan stayed by her side. He whispered to her, encouraged her, held her hand when the pain became too much. For the first time, he wasn't trying to fix anything. He was simply there. When the baby finally arrived, the room fell quiet for one breathless second, and then the sound of a newborn's cry broke through. High, fragile, alive. Clara's body sagged with relief, tears slipping down her cheeks as the doctor held up a tiny boy, wrinkled and red, but breathing strong. "Yes, son," the nurse said softly, placing the baby in Clara's arms. Ethan stood at her side, staring down at the child, his son. The world seemed to shift around him. This wasn't just a life, it was the life. the one that had been waiting for him while he chased everything else. "He has your eyes," Clara whispered, her voice raw. Ethan's throat tightened, a lump forming that he couldn't swallow away. He reached out, gently brushing a fingertip against the baby's tiny hand. The child curled his fingers around it instinctively. That single, reflexive grip undid something deep inside Ethan that he hadn't even realized was bound. For the first time in years, he felt still. Clara looked up at him, her eyes searching. What now? Ethan didn't have a polished answer, just the truth. "Now," he said, voice hoarse, "I stay. For both of you." And for the first time, she didn't pull away. The days after Liam's birth passed in a blur of sleepless nights and slow revelations. The hospital discharged Clara early, thanks to her strength and the baby's surprising resilience, but the world they stepped back into felt entirely different. Everything was quieter, more fragile. Yet within that fragility, something powerful was beginning to grow. Ethan had not gone back to work. That alone sent shockwaves through his inner circle. Grayson Capital didn't know how to function without him at the helm, and for the first time in years, he didn't care. He delegated, he postponed, he told his assistant to clear his calendar indefinitely. The man who once demanded precision and control now hovered over a bassinet in a sunlit corner of Clara's apartment, trying to figure out how to swaddle his newborn son without making the baby look like a tangled burrito. He failed, often, but he kept trying. At first, Clara said little. She allowed Ethan into their space, but with boundaries that were both spoken and unspoken. He never stayed overnight. He never brought gifts, flowers, or fanfare. Only the essentials: diapers, formula, onesies he had no clue how to choose, but bought anyway. He cooked sometimes, cleaned when she didn't ask, took calls from the hallway, always keeping his voice low so Liam wouldn't wake. What surprised Clara most wasn't what Ethan did. It was how he listened. She noticed the way he'd pause mid-action when she spoke, not just hearing her, but hearing her. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix her words or rationalize her pain. He simply absorbed it, sometimes with guilt in his eyes, sometimes with quiet understanding. That, more than anything, shook her. One afternoon, as Liam dozed against her chest, Clara sat across from Ethan at her small kitchen table. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, warming the silence between them. She watched him as he carefully sorted through a box of baby supplies he'd brought, meticulously checking expiration dates and reading labels aloud. "You ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. He looked up. Miss what?" "Being in control of the office, that version of your life." He was quiet for a long moment, said, I don't miss who I was in it." She blinked. That wasn't the answer she expected. "I spent so much time chasing the next milestone," he said. "Money, power, status. I built a tower so high I didn't even realize you were slipping out the door until you were already gone." Clara lowered her gaze. "You didn't just miss the signs, Ethan. You made it impossible to stay." "I know," he said softly, "and I'll probably carry that with me forever." His voice didn't waver with defensiveness. There was no plea for forgiveness, just truth. And for the first time, Clara let the silence settle without rushing to fill it. Weeks passed. Liam grew stronger, louder, and more curious. Ethan learned how to change diapers without gagging. He sang off-key lullabies and Googled how to treat diaper rash at 3 a.m. He bought a stroller and insisted on pushing it himself, even if it meant bumbling down the uneven sidewalks of Queens in his $1,000 loafers. At the park, other parents stared, recognizing him, but Ethan didn't flinch. He wasn't there to perform. He was there to be. The moment that shifted something between them came on a clear afternoon. Clara, exhausted, had dozed off on a park bench. Ethan paced nearby with Liam in his arms, gently rocking him, with a kind of focus he never brought to board meetings. He looked down at the tiny face resting against his chest and felt something unshakable take root. It wasn't an obligation. It wasn't guilt. It was love. Real, steady, undeniable. When Clara stirred awake, Ethan didn't say anything poetic. He just looked at her, then back at Liam. "I finally get it," he murmured. "It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up." Clara studied him. "You're not the same man I married," she said. He smiled faintly. "I know. I'm trying to be the man you deserve." She didn't respond right away. Then, slowly, she nodded. Trying is a start. In the weeks that followed, things didn't magically transform. Claire still had doubts. Ethan still had moments where his past instincts reared their head, but they talked more. They sat together during feedings, shared quiet laughter when Liam finally slept through the night. And for the first time in a long time, they found a rhythm that didn't hurt. One evening, as Clara tucked Liam into his crib, she turned to see Ethan leaning against the doorway, watching them both with a soft smile. She didn't tell him to leave. He didn't ask to stay. Instead, he walked over and kissed his son gently on the forehead. Clara watched the gesture, something tender unfurling in her chest. Are you going to stay for dinner? She asked, almost shyly. He looked surprised, then smiled. If you'll have me. They ate simply at her small table, their conversation easy, like two people slowly remembering how to be gentle with each other. When the dishes were cleared and the baby monitor hummed quietly between them, Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. Not with urgency, not with expectation, but with gratitude. Clara did pull away. That night didn't end in declarations or promises. It ended in quiet. And for the first time, that was enough.